grateful for this opportunity to share some of my thoughts and experiences of Brother Yusef Lateef. Thank you to Glenn Siegal for organizing this. I think it's great. There'll be so many resources on the website for people to find out about the amazing range and depth of what Brother Yusef Lateef contributed to culture in our society. I feel like he should be celebrated widely. So I thought maybe for myself I'd just reflect a little bit upon my own relationship with Yusuf. I was so fortunate to spend the better part of 25 years working with Yusuf, performing with him, touring with him, during which time our relationship really deepened and grew into one that was really like a family feeling. So I met Yusuf in 1988. I was living in Don and Moki Cherry's loft for the summer, and Yusuf had invited our collective group Eternal Wind to join him and Cecil McBee for a concert at Symphony Space. Perhaps this was his first concert, I think, since returning from 4 years of living in Zaria, Nigeria. At least it was the first concert in the New York area, presented by Robert Browning and the World Music Institute. So I met Yusuf when he arrived at the loft for the rehearsal. One of the things that was so great about Yusuf was how generous and open-minded he was. He asked me to bring in some compositions for the concert, even though we had never worked together, and we performed several of them. One of the things that's so inspiring about Yusuf is that he's always open and interested in inventing new processes, new ways of approaching material, always thinking of new things. With the countless concerts we did, all the recordings we did together, Yusuf, he always said, with every project I want to do something that I've never done before. I did at least 20 or 30 recordings with Yusuf. It was always an adventure. It was always the most deep, mystical, and musical experience. Always a challenge, always a joy, always a pleasure to be with Brother Yusuf, to spend time with him and his wife, Tahira, who he adored, for us to all be on the road, sharing meals and laughter and so on. So some of the recordings we did together in the studio, but some of them where he actually would commission me, he'd ask me to create something with my percussion and electronics, and I didn't know what the music was going to be, right? So I'd say, well, Brother Yusuf, what do you want me to do? And all he would say was, Brother Adam, vary your palette. We also collaborated compositionally on several recordings: The World at Peace, Beyond the Sky, Towards the Unknown, and In the Garden. A story about The World at Peace, Yusuf received a commission to compose that music for 12 musicians. And he invited me to write some of the music. And he had this idea that he would write for 6 of the musicians. He would tell me which instruments he wrote for, and he would inform me how many bars he wrote. We were using bar lines at the time for this project. So he would tell me which instruments he didn't write for, and it was my job to write, without having heard his music, to write for the other 6 instruments. We did that for several pieces, and then the opposite. I got to choose the instruments, and then he would write for the number of bars I had written for, and the approximate tempo and the instruments I didn't write for. We put this music together. It was incredible. I'd never heard anything like it. We were pleased. It had to pass muster. It had to be valid, interesting, soulful. Why don't we do the same thing with the cover, right? So I have been painting for most of my life. Yusuf was painting, so we actually exchanged some paintings, and we painted on each other's paintings, which later I found is actually something the Surrealists did. They called it Exquisite Corpse. Later, in 2000, we had an octet that performed for Yusuf's 80th birthday and it was at Alice Tully Hall, sponsored by Tom Buckner and the World Music Institute. So this time Yusuf said, well, Brother Adam, I'm going to write the first 15 bars of a composition. I want you to write the next 11 bars. I'll write the next 13. You write the next 17, and so on. That also came out so fascinating, so interesting, so unusual, so prototypical. He always took every concert as an opportunity to reach for something new, to try something new, to experiment, right? The same with each recording. We used to write each other letters, right? That tells you how long we've been knowing each other. And I have a whole collection of some incredible letters here from Yusuf with ideas about things we can do in concerts, sort of roadmaps for the concerts, and also quotes from many of his favorite writers. He would write out the quote in hand, maybe something by Helen Keller or Albert Einstein, Claude Debussy, Charlie Parker, Confucius, the Quran, and he would send them. And also his reflections and thoughts. Later on, we began doing so many duet concerts that eventually we didn't even make a roadmap. We just, we had developed a language, a way of intuiting, dialoguing with each other, creating an open space for something to happen. And that language we created together, there were steps along the way. Here's another example of something where Yusuf was so innovative. I had sent him some music from the Central African Republic, Congo culture with a K. And he heard one piece, it was called Dakpa, and he said, well, we'll do our own kind of Dakpa. And so he started out with this formalized idea where you play 5, 7, or 9 note phrases. I'll play 5, 7, or 9 note phrases back and forth like that, call and response. And of course, very quickly it was never dogmatic. It became an opening to a way of dialoguing with each other that we might not have done otherwise. So all we needed then was to say Dakpa, and we know we had an idea how to open things up. Yusuf made all these fascinating electronic tapes with Brother Matt Waugh and others he worked with at UMass. I loved being around Brother Yusuf. He was such a beautiful, generous person. Yusuf was so humble. He was always investigating, always thinking about new things. One time we spoke, he was in, about a month before he passed. He called, I was here at this piano, and he was describing to me different kind of intervallic combinations that he was thinking about. The last concert I did with Yusuf was in the year he passed, 2013. We played a concert, we actually organized a concert and performed in it. Yusuf presented one of his string quartets, a saxophone trio, and a new piece for piano, and then he and I played a duet at the end of the concert. So maybe in conclusion, I would say the thing about Yusuf was he was a radiant being. I think all of us who were around him were better for being around him. The conversation was always more elevated, loving, generous. He was really all about furthering the music, exploring new creative arenas, doing research. He had an incredible work ethic, always on time, always working on music, always creating. There's a saying I learned when I lived in Ghana, West Africa. It goes, live your life like a future ancestor. And I think Yusuf had that consciousness, and the way that he shared and touched so many of us, people he met in person, and then people who have been moved and touched by the sound of his instrument, the sound of his music, the feeling in his music. A concert we did for Yusuf's 80th birthday, Ornette Coleman was in attendance, and I remember he was very excited after the concert. Yusuf played a long, unaccompanied solo, and he came up to us and he said, Yusuf, you played the entire history of the tenor saxophone. A few years later, Yusuf and I did a duet concert at Roulette in New York, and Richard Abrams was there. And afterwards, he came up and he said the same thing. He He said Yusuf played the entire history of the tenor saxophone. Yes, when you hear Yusuf, of course you're hearing Ben Webster, you're hearing Lester Young, and then at the same time, it's 100% Yusuf too, right? Another interesting thing I noticed is over the 25 years I worked with Yusuf, his playing changed and evolved during that time. The kinds of things he was playing and was interested in the early 90s was not what he was doing 20 years later. But two things about that are interesting. One is that it always sounded like him, right? And the other is that evolution happened on all of the instruments that he played. It happened on the tenor saxophone, happened on the alto flute, on the C flute. His playing evolved and changed, expanded into different kind of linguistic areas, but different on each of those instruments. But yet it always sounded like Yusef Lateef. Yusuf used to say, the tradition is to sound like yourself. And I was so grateful to be able to be around him as much as I was. I feel like I'm a better artist, a better musician, and actually a better human being as a result of knowing Yusef Lateef.
Catch the first train. I'm gonna catch the first train. Hey, I never feel the same.